Okay, good morning everyone. I think we're all here now. So hello and welcome to today's Green Business Fund webinar called Developing Your Green Credentials. So my name is Lucy Hunt and I'm an associate at Carbon Trust. I've been working here for about 3 years now, focusing primarily on energy reduction for small businesses and also public sector organisations. So I will be presenting the first half of this webinar, and then my colleague Chantal Thompson will be presenting the second half, and she'll give you a short introduction So I'd like to start off with a brief introduction about the Carbon Trust, just for those of you who haven't come across us before. So we are an independent, mission-driven organisation. So all the profits that we earn, we reinvest back into our mission, which is to accelerate the move to a sustainable low-carbon economy. We work internationally as well, so we have our main offices in all of the capital cities around the UK, and also offices in various other countries around the world, including South Africa, Mexico and China. And what we do is we provide services through three different sections really. So we've got advice, advising businesses, governments and the public sector on opportunities for, as I said, accelerating the move to a sustainable low carbon economy. We also have a footprinting service as well, which is concentrating on measurement and certification, and then technology, which is generally technology research for different clients and partners. And the agenda for today's session. So this webinar will be focusing on developing your green credentials beyond your physical workspace. So we've already recorded a series of webinars which are focused on key opportunities to reduce the carbon impact of your maybe office space, your workspace. So focusing on opportunities such as heating, lighting, energy management, and those are all available online. So they've all been recorded, so you can find those after this session if you'd like to look at those. But what we're focusing on today is really a broader overview. So as I said, looking beyond that organisational footprint. So we're going to be starting with a broad overview of the global challenge, the reality of climate change. So that's in order to give you a good idea of what's going on at the moment, give you a few statistics as well that you can use as motivation to contribute to lowering your carbon impact. Then we'll be moving on to the case for action shortly, so looking at building a business case and making the case for change. So you can really draw in those stats that we already talk about, those motivations in the first section, in order to then take some action. And then I'll be handing over to my colleague Chantal, who will be looking at some more concrete opportunities, focusing on small businesses, but if any of you are from other organisations, it will also be relevant. So that will be focusing on engaging your supply chain, becoming a green supplier, negotiating a green lease and promoting credentials, so looking more at the marketing side as well. And then Chantal will finish off with an overview of further support. So that's further support through the Green Business Fund and also some other services that we offer through the Carbon Trust. So to get started on the first section, the reality of climate change. So I'll come back to this graph in a second, but first of all, I just wanted to give you a really broad overview of what's been going on in this sector. So for the first time in human history, the concentration of climate warming carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has passed the milestone of 400 parts per million. So the last time that levels reached that amount was actually several million years ago, when we were living in environments where the Arctic was ice-free and sea level was up to 40 meters higher than it is today. So completely different conditions, and these conditions are also expected to return at some point. So obviously that would result in devastating consequences for civilization, unless we can really bring down those emissions, especially of CO2 from the burning of greenhouse gases. And so climate change is really, so it's been changing constantly over the history of geological time. So the global average temperature today is about 15 degrees centigrade, and evidence does suggest it has been much higher and much lower than this in the past. So it's not that this has never happened before, but the bit that we're focusing on is the human impact on that, because scientists are now saying that the warming is now occurring much more rapidly than in previous events. So the main issue of this is well, it comes into the greenhouse effect. So if I just run through exactly what that is, it's basically the way that the Earth's atmosphere traps energy from the sun, so the solar energy radiating back out to space from the Earth's surface is absorbed by atmospheric greenhouse gases and re-emitted in all directions. So the idea is that this keeps the planet at a habitable temperature. So without this effect, the Earth would be about 30 degrees colder, which would mean that obviously would make it much more hostile to live on. So it's a natural occurring phenomenon, but scientists believe that that with the greenhouse effect, with what's happening naturally, we are also adding to that with our human impact. So releasing gases, for example, from industry and agriculture, which is trapping more energy and then increasing the temperature. So since the Industrial Revolution began in 1750, CO2 levels have risen by more than 30%, and methane levels have risen by more than 140%. So that means that the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is now higher than at any time in at least the last 800,000 years. So that gives you a bit of context around what's been happening, why this is such an issue now. And then you can really see this visually on this graph that we have in front of us. So you can see on the y-axis we've got temperature difference from 1961 to 1990, and then on the x-axis we've got the rank of the hottest years. So what it's really doing is it's moved all the years out of order and it's ranking them in stages from hottest to coldest. And so really the biggest takeaway from this is that you can see in the top 20 rank there, all of the years in the past 15 years have been included in that. So that's really showing how this is really accelerating and how this issue is becoming bigger and bigger. So what is the impact of this then? So we understand that it's happening. What's the result of it? And so scientists agree that the direct result is increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather events. So you can see here some research from the UK Met Office, and all of these events they predict have shown some evidence of human involvement in human-induced climate change. So you can see there are different events such as droughts, extreme rainfall, Hurricane Sandy as well in 2012. And then you can see the result a little bit more locally here. So UK storms linked to climate change. Obviously, we've had huge problems with flooding over recent years. And so you can really see that the change is being brought home. So obviously, we think in the UK a few degrees of warming maybe wouldn't go astray, but this is really the unintended impacts that you can see right very close to home. And then another interesting example very recently, which you all have heard of, is the Cape Town water crisis, which really showed the reality of climate change. So if these droughts keep continuing, how are we going to mitigate that? And even though the one for this year has worked very well with the mitigation actions that were put in place, obviously this is not an issue that's going away. And so looking forward into future years, obviously for Cape Town it will still be a problem, but also for other cities around the world. We've actually done a viewpoint on this one, so if you have a look on our website, it's a very interesting read. And all of this is happening at the same time as rapid population growth and economic growth as well. So there are different population growth predictions. So the UN has predicted that it's increasing very rapidly up until 2050. And what's really important in this is the rising middle class. So obviously with a rising middle class, you have a much higher impact because people are demanding more resources. You can see at the bottom there, energy, food, water, materials. People are expecting a higher quality of life. And you can see that they predicted an increase by 30 to 80% up to 2030. So what are we all doing about it? So to give you a bit of global context on the response, the highest profile response in recent years has been the Paris Agreement from COP21 in 2015. And so within that event, we committed to stay within a global temperature rise of 2 degrees C, with an ambition of keeping that down to 1.5 degrees C. And so that's been an international agreement. There's been international consensus that we do need to limit those and also adapt to those temperature rises as well, very importantly. And nearly every country globally has now committed to a specific target to aim to keep global temperature rise to less than 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So you can see those through the nationally determined contributions. That's worth having a look at to see what different countries have committed to doing. And as a result of that, each country then has to report on their progress every 2 years to make sure that those plans are being stuck to as well. So you can see there as well that the UK ratified the Paris Climate Agreement in Marrakesh. That was in 2016. And we are still, Trump permitting, broadly on track with progress towards that. It's also important to note that there is currently still a gap between the rhetoric and the reality. So you can see, even though we've made those commitments, it's not necessarily, just because we've said that we're going to do it, is not necessarily going to go away immediately. So you can see in this graph here what the current emissions projections are. So the red line at the top is the emissions trajectory if we continue to keep emitting as we are currently. You can see there in the middle, the brown line, you've got those contribution commitments, as I spoke about previously. So keeping those just about to 2 degrees. And then at the bottom there, at the blue line, that's what we're really aiming for. So you can see really the gaps between what we're aiming for, what we've committed to doing, and what we're currently achieving. And just for your own knowledge as well, so we're now at about 1 degree over pre-industrial levels, and obviously doubling this even, you can imagine what a bigger effect that is, especially as the effects of climate change are non-linear. So there will be a tipping point when the effects start to accelerate, and you could argue that we're starting to see that now. Oops. Okay, so there are also a few positive actions that are occurring alongside the emissions reduction attempts, which are aiding progress. So you can see on this slide that investors and consumers are starting to care about future impacts. So this is an example of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which was founded in 2015, I believe. So basically what it does is it discloses climate change risks to particular businesses for investors and other stakeholders. So it's really a way of recognizing that there is a risk there, and also motivating businesses to then make sure that they're mitigating that risk in order to not risk their shareholder value. And another positive we have here, similarly, is hitting clean technology tipping points. So tipping points are normally spoken about negatively. So we normally say we don't know when it's going to spiral out of control, but in this point it's a positive. So offshore wind in particular has drastically improved. So there have been drastic price reductions and rapid technology deployment. So the recent Contracts for Difference auction set the strike price of a megawatt hour at £57, which was a major step in demonstrating value for money, and has really improved the situation for that particular technology. So that's looking very positive. Another example is electric vehicles. So that shift began more recently really, and you can really see it gathering momentum now. With government setting future bans for the sale of petrol cars. And as that goes in, then manufacturers are starting to respond, consumers are starting to respond, and we'll be able to see that change happening quite rapidly. So within all of that, how is the UK doing? So we talk a lot about what's going on globally, but it's important to realise how we're contributing to it as well. Sorry, I've just got my control pane in the way. I've just moved it out of the way. There we go. So this slide gives a broad overview of changes in energy use in the UK. So you can see there details about fracking, nuclear power, renewables. I'll show you on the next slide exactly what that breakdown is, because this is changing all the time as investment is poured into new technologies. So with the announcement of the Clean Growth Strategy recently, we saw huge amounts of investment being dedicated to different technology types that has potential to change again. Interesting points are that coal demand is falling rapidly, largely due to price, but also due to policy drivers, and also wind power overtaking coal for the first time. So that was a really big win for the renewable sector. So as I said, you can see here on this slide what the breakdown is of the energy makeup in the UK, so how this has been changing over time. And really the biggest takeaway from this is those bright green segments, which is the vast reduction in coal use. And you can see the fossil dependency reducing there over time at the bottom. So in 1975, the fossil fuel dependency was 96% and now down to 82%. So that's changing. And you can see it again here, again visually presented. So we've got total UK greenhouse gas emissions dropping by 35% since 1990, which is brilliant progress, and carbon dioxide emissions decreasing by around 29% at the same time. So it's, oops, skipped ahead. So it's important to remember that within this, so it's caveated slightly by UK import and export of electricity. So we're actually now a net importer of energy, and it's up to over 1/3 of energy use. So it's a good thing to be aware of, that actually, even though those emissions are decreasing, some of that is coming in from other countries. So in some cases, those effects are displaced. And finally on this one, another interesting point is that although the industry emissions have increased drastically, so you can see there with that green line in the graph on the left-hand side, that's seen some really good progress, but you can see there with the blue line, that's been creeping up steadily. So that's transport emissions rising over time. And that's in particular due to a growing economy, much more people traveling, cheaper short-haul flights as well, which have all contributed to that increase. So that was a broad picture of what's going on at the moment. Now I'd like to just run you through a few points around the case for action. So there have been pressures on businesses coming at all angles. This slide just gives you a good idea of what the different pressures are and what you need to act on. So obviously we've got buyers, we've got consumers demanding different things. We've got technology having an impact, changing the way that we work, regulations and policies coming from the top. Supply chain, which Chantal will talk about in a minute, is a very important one, looking at your downstream impacts. Investors as well, so with divestment movements, etc. They've been having more control about where businesses are operating. And then physical impacts. So as I was saying earlier, the effects of climate change and adapting to those. So we've got a number of reasons for businesses to prioritise this as a case for action. So first of all, we've got reducing operating costs. So the cost of energy continues to rise. DEC energy price projections have indicated that electricity prices are likely to rise over the next 10 years by nearly 36% in real terms. So that's obviously a huge increase. Secondly, there's improving brand and customer loyalty. And some recent research that we did showed that the number of people who said that they would boycott a company based on its green credentials is up to 51%. And I'm sure you've seen various social media stories recently that can really have a large impact on that. Thirdly is leadership on carbon reduction. So we've already seen a few companies leading the way, for example, with science-based targets, really going above and beyond what they need to do, which then helps to feed into that brand improvement. Fourthly, complying with standards. So green standards, obviously SMEs tend to be part of a supply chain. So even if you're not, if the larger standards aren't applicable to you, then if you're part of a supply chain, you need to be thinking about what your upstream impacts are and what kind of demands the companies that you're supplying to might have on you. It's also important to note that international law is tightening up, and there may be changes in that. And finally, engaging employees. So we find time and time again that staff like to work for a company that is doing good. And also, if you can improve your working environment, if you can improve that social aspect, then you have a higher staff retention. So that's all from me for now. I'm going to pass on to Chantal, who's going to be looking at a few of the more concrete opportunities for small businesses.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lucy, and good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for dialing in today. I'm Chantal Thompson, an associate at the Carbon Trust, being at the Carbon Trust now for about 4.5 years, working on a wide variety of projects covering energy efficiency and carbon reduction within small businesses primarily. So this next section, I'll talk you through the importance of your supply chain and value chain, how to become a green supplier, and then also look at negotiating green leases and, importantly, promoting your green credentials. So on the screen right now, you can see a product or services value chain. So the reason why it's so important to look at just beyond the four walls of your business is because actually the impact of your product and service in total is actually most probably sits outside of your actual operations. So that's called a product or services value chain. So looking at the diagram, in the middle there, you can see your own operations. So you can, of course, look at your own facilities, your lighting, your heating, for example, where you purchase your electricity from and how you use your company vehicles. But importantly, especially if you manufacture a product, your upstream impacts, so looking at your suppliers, you're going to have manufacturing and processing, or at least the products that you purchase from your suppliers will be doing those activities. You'll be having, or you'll be purchasing raw materials, or at least your suppliers will be. And there'll be a large amount of transportation involved before you actually get the product and use and change the product on your site. And then, of course, you've got the downstream impacts. So once you've sold your product or service, it will be used in some way, or it might be distributed or further processed. And then there's the end of life. What happens to it then? It will most probably be disposed. So hopefully all of you dialed in can see there where you sit on the value chain. So it's highly likely that actually you will have suppliers, but you most probably actually have or are a supplier for a much larger organization. So it's really important that you think about, how can I reduce the upstream impacts? How can I purchase products and make my product more sustainable, but also have a think about, what are my customers wanting from me? What could I be doing to make my product or service more desirable? So a few recommendations of what you could be looking at. So your materials. You could look to reduce your raw materials where possible and look for more environmentally friendly options. With manufacturing, where possible, change the manufacturing process to reduce energy and water use. Simplify your product packaging design to reduce the number and volume of materials, and cut out waste from all production processes where you can. On the retail side, redesign packaging. Could you think about a more innovative way to distribute your products in a more environmentally friendly way? And think about how your product's actually going to be used. Will actually the carbon and energy intensity of your product come from its in-use phase? So a good example of that is, for example, a car. Could the use phase be extended by making it easier to repair? How is it going to be disposed? Can it be recycled? Can it be reused? What's the value of the product at the end of its life? Can the actual operation of the product be made more efficient? So, for example, with lighting, that's what LED lighting has achieved. It's drastically reduced the energy use of the lighting sector. Reuse, encourage the reuse of your product. Make sure that its quality extends throughout its product life cycle. Is it easy to be recycled? So there are many, many things that can be done and should be thought about. So that leads nicely on to a new buzzword which is going around, which is circular economy. So no longer should we be designing products that simply get produced, manufactured, sold, and then disposed of. We should be remanufacturing our products to reduce waste. And this is really something that we encourage new businesses, new innovative startups to be thinking about. How can you be part of that revolution? So on the slide there, you can see the traditional linear supply chain, and then the remanufacturing supply chain, where you're thinking, actually, can this product be changed at the end of its life? Can we increase the value at the end of its life rather than it simply needing to be disposed? So all things that should be thought about when thinking about product design, and also service design. So a lot, whether you're a supplier within a larger supply chain or you have lots of suppliers yourself, there are two different ways that you can improve or reduce the impact of your product and service. You can look at the design of it, but often you can only do so much, and actually you should rely on your suppliers to also take action. And this is really important, because if you have a very energy carbon intensive supply chain, if with price volatility, and as Lucy discussed, prices are only going to increase, you're not really protecting yourselves from future price increases. So it's so important to think about engaging your supply chain on these matters, and also making sure that you as a supplier are doing as much as you can, so your customers are very confident in your abilities and that they can trust you going forward as a supplier to mitigate their climate change risks. So there are many ways that you can do this. So you should really start with understanding who are, or doing, it's called a hotspotting analysis. So looking at who are your biggest resource intensive suppliers, if you're one of the big customers, and actually focusing your efforts on them. And you can do many things. You can change your procurement requirements to ensure that all suppliers have energy policies in place, have certain standards in place, actually share with them tips on how to reduce their emissions and put policies in place. And there are a few very well-known big corporates that are doing things on this. So, for example, the Tesco Knowledge Hub is an online community for Tesco suppliers, which encourages members to share best practice in carbon reduction. And for example, they negotiate discounts on energy efficient lighting equipment. The M&S standard suppliers must meet certain requirements. They must have effective and comprehensive energy management systems, staff competencies, and awareness in energy and continuous improvement. And if you yourself are a supplier, you need to be thinking about how you're going to meet all these big requirements and get your policies and practices in place. CDP have a supply chain program, which is where I think up to 4,000 suppliers at the moment disclose information to their customers. It's a fantastic way for customers to be able to see the credentials of their suppliers. So it's definitely worth thinking whether you're a customer with a huge supply chain or a supplier yourself, how are you going to get your house in order really to meet these requirements. So the best thing about taking action on climate change and reducing your carbon and energy intensity is that it is an absolutely fantastic marketing tool. Customers are wanting low impact products. And so you need to therefore make sure that if you're doing all this great work that you're getting recognized for it. So you should absolutely be sharing your aims and achievements, let people know what you've done, but also more importantly, what you're going to do, what your ambitions are. Show that you are really trying to become a leader in your sector. But it's also very important that you make sure what you're claiming, what you're trying to do, is verified. The last thing you want is for your brand to be tarnished by someone picking holes in what you're saying. So very often organizations will get verification, whether that's for the carbon footprint of their product or service, or the reductions they've achieved, or the policies and practices that they've got in place. There are many of these. For example, you've got the ISO standards 14,001, 50,001, you've got the Carbon Trust standards and the BSI kite marks and so forth. So there are many out there to look at. So this slide just shows how customer expectations are increasing, which is a reason to really engage in the marketing and communications potential of what you're doing. So this is just an interesting diagram, really. So back in 2008, our own Carbon Trust standard, which looks at measuring an organization's carbon footprint. Now we look at water and waste and supply chain as well, and also product and service footprints. But back in 2008, we just required organizations to show that they measured, managed and reduced and then certified their current emissions and the reductions that they've achieved. But as 10 years have passed, these standards are becoming far more rigorous because the market is improving and customers are wanting a more rigorous testing, really, of what companies are actually and products are doing. So, for example, we require that risk and opportunity planning is included. There's long-term target setting, that organizations are looking at their value chain and not just their organizational footprint, as we saw in that previous diagram. The impact of your product and services is far greater outside of your own organizational boundary, and demonstrating that you're going to continually progress. It doesn't matter if you achieved, say, a 10% reduction a year ago, you need to continue doing that, and that's what's really important. So I had a quick look this morning about what was in the news at the moment about brands and sustainability, and how, if I typed in sustainable brands, what came up. And this did, which I think is a fantastic example. So there's been a huge discussion over the last few years on the fact that disposable cups or coffee cups are not actually recyclable. And of course, we've got the huge problem with plastic waste in the oceans. As you can see here, Starbucks are seeking a more sustainable cup solution. But actually, shareholders want even more ambitious action, and they're looking, as you can see there in the description of the story, circular economy is coming into it as well. So they're, they're recognizing that this is a problem for their business. They can't continue using this very unsustainable cup as a takeaway cup. And shareholders are recognizing this is a big opportunity for Starbucks. And you can really align your brand with sustainability and values, but you've got to do it properly. It's not something that can sit on the periphery. You've got to build it into how you build your business and design your products and communicate it in the right way. So I just thought we'd share with you a few examples of our own Carbon Trust labels. So we've got a label that you can stick on products. We measure and verify that you are committed to reducing the carbon footprint of those products and that you have achieved a carbon reduction on those products. And you can see there corn, Kingsmill, Loomis, they're using that label to communicate with their customers that they are reducing the carbon impact of their product. Because if it wasn't on there, a consumer wouldn't know. And it allows consumers to make a choice when in the supermarket or looking for a service provider, that this organization is looking to take action and is taking action. So it's a fantastic way of communicating to your consumers that you are taking action. And there are many others out there in the market that you can look at. So taking a step back, so we're very conscious that often this sort of webinar where you're looking at product and service innovation, often those dialing in are from startups and young small businesses. So you might actually be working, say, in a co-working space and perhaps looking for choosing a premises. And it's difficult. It's very easy, especially when you don't own your own property or your own office space, to ensure that it's energy efficient. You don't have that much control. So we just wanted to put a slide in here about what to look for when you're viewing premises. So from April, which is a great thing, April 2018, it'll be a requirement for landlords to rent out properties with an EPC rating of no lower than an E, which is very low. So what you want to look for is an EPC rating of as high as possible. And you can also look out for BREEAM and SCAR ratings, as they're a great indication of how energy efficient a property is that you will be renting. So when viewing a potential premises, you might not be able to identify this yourself, but it's definitely questions to ask. So for example, ask about the lighting. Is it low energy fluorescent lighting or ideally LED? Are there controls in place? So will the lights turn off when people leave the room, when the actual lighting levels are high enough just to use natural daylight? Is there double glazing so that they can reduce, which will of course reduce the amount of heat required to heat the building and also dampen noise and make it a much nicer working environment? Is there lots of natural light, which of course is very important for morale and productivity, but also reduces the energy required for lighting? And is the property insulated? Is there loft insulation? If you might, you probably won't be able to view that, but if you can, it should be 10 inches thick. And this reduces losses by up to 40%. So a few things to think about there, and definitely make sure that it's an option for you or a consideration when you're looking at premises. As it also motivates staff. The worst thing you can have is you're trying to develop a low carbon innovative product or service, but you're in a building that is extremely inefficient. It doesn't quite marry up, especially if you've got customers coming in for meetings. It's not great if you're in a very inefficient, either too hot, too cold building, which isn't a nice environment to work in. Well, on the flip side, the problem is if you don't own the building and you're a tenant, often you actually aren't in charge of the building controls. So we've just popped this in there. It's the Better Buildings Partnership toolkit for green leases, and we really, really encourage you to take a look if you're in this position and before you move in and negotiate contracts, as it gives you some great ideas and tools on how to make sure that you are able to get the best out of the building that you lease. So we'll now move on to further support. So the Green Business Fund. The Green Business Fund is a support service for SMEs that are looking to invest in energy saving equipment and kit. So it's eligible for all small and medium-sized businesses, schools, sole traders, charities in England, Scotland and Wales. We define SME as no more than 250 employees, an annual turnover not in excess of 25.9 million, or an annual balance sheet not in excess of 12.9 million. And you must not be more than 25% owned by an entity which does not meet the criteria. We often do get lots of questions about eligibility, so please feel free to ask later or at another point. But what's available? So there are lots and lots of different services available from the Green Business Fund. So the core services are energy efficiency training. So they are physical workshops, so 2-hour workshops around the country hosted by the Carbon Trust. And they deliver learnings so that the audience can go away and understand energy consumption, identify no to low cost measures within their own organisations. And typically, they are appropriate for companies or businesses with less than 50 employees, but absolutely anyone can come. If you have more than that, that's absolutely fine. So we have a few workshops coming up. So the next one is in Alton on the 18th of April, Eastleigh on the 25th of April, and Chippenham on the 19th of October. We'll be running many, many more across the country. So just look at our website for up-to-date workshops, or sign up to our newsletter, the Carbon Trust newsletter, and you will be notified about them. The second service is opportunity assessment. So these are either remote or on-site. It depends on your size and energy spend. And they're delivered by a Carbon Trust engineer. They'll either visit your site or ask you for information over the phone, and you'll receive your top 3 costed energy saving recommendations that advise on how to go on to realise these savings. They'll tailor an energy and management approach for you, and leave you with a report, which is normally in a PowerPoint format, which is great for then sharing with other colleagues for needing sign-off, for example. So it's available to all SMEs in the qualifying geographies. Finally, or this sort of advice, so from this page, sorry, so is the implementation advice. So you can get up to 5 days of support from a Carbon Trust consultant. So this advice is appropriate if you've already identified your energy saving opportunities, whether that's through an opportunity assessment or you already know what they are, but you're not quite sure, you need some support in identifying appropriate suppliers and assessing supplier quotes. You can actually get this support if you have up to 1,000 employees. So this is the one service which is available to those who don't quite meet the SME eligibility criteria. So if you're a slightly organisation, you can qualify for this support. So the most exciting element, in my opinion, of the Green Business Fund is the capital contribution. So once you've got your energy saving opportunity identified, for example, in an LED lighting project, if your project is eligible, you can receive 15% towards the total cost of the kit. So there's an upper limit of the capital contribution that you can receive of £5,000 and a lower limit of £750. So we do have some requirements on the project. So the project should pay back within 5 years. If it doesn't quite, I believe you can still get something towards it. So you'll get 15% of the amount that pays back within 5 years. So there are some ways around that if some projects don't pay back within 5 years. So also you need to have your project delivered by a Carbon Trust accredited supplier, which is found on our Green Business Directory. So actually, if we have any people dialing in who are suppliers, I'd really recommend you take a look at that. The reason for firstly, I'll introduce what that is. So the Green Business Directory is a list of accredited suppliers of energy efficient and renewable equipment, and you can search the directory by technology and location. And we've basically vetted all of those suppliers who are on the list. And the reason why we have done that, and the reason why we require that for the Green Business Fund, is so that we can ensure that these projects that we are funding or part funding go on to achieve the savings that they should do. So it's our way of ensuring that these projects are done well. So I'm sure there might be a few questions on that, so please do let us know at the end or later on. So we've also got some relatively new services from the Green Business Fund, which you can access at any time. which include the technical webinars and the publications. So like today's webinar, we've also got webinars on energy consuming equipment, for example, lighting, HVAC, motors and drives. Some of these are upcoming and there's a calendar of those on the website, or you can download existing webinars. And they're delivered, like me and Lucy today, by Carbon Trust expert, and they're typically about 45 minutes to an hour long. And we've also got our publications. So again, you can access these anytime on our website. We're publishing more each month at the moment. You can download an updated heating, ventilation and cooling, lighting, how to be a good supplier, and carbon footprinting and renewable energy publications are all very relevant to today's webinar from our website, and there will be more to come. And finally, the Virtual Energy Manager. So it's a bit like today's webinar, but you do, there are 6 tailored modules, and it helps you to identify and embed good practice and realize savings associated with improved energy management. They are available to organizations that are interested in some of the other services as well. So please just let us know if you're interested in that service. And finally, coming soon, not quite released yet, is an organizational carbon footprint calculator that we support SMEs to report your carbon footprint and understand where your biggest carbon impacts are. It will follow the greenhouse gas protocol, and it comes with step-by-step instructions. So it really gives you a basic level of understanding of your organization's carbon footprint. So an online resource separate to the Green Business Fund is our Carbon Trust SME network. So it's an online community which is free to join. At the moment, we've got about 2,000 members. Most of them are SMEs or they're organisations with an interest in SMEs. And it basically allows organisations to talk to one another about energy efficiency, resource efficiency, carbon reduction. And we also post all of our SME events on there, so our Green Business Fund events and any relevant news or legislation. So just a great community to be a part of. So there's a link there to sign up. And finally, Start to Act. It's another program for small businesses, but it's actually focused on young SMEs and startups who are looking to adopt low to no cost energy efficiency measures, and also look at how to design and develop their business ideas. So it's an EU funded program, and actually Lucy, who you heard from earlier, is the manager of that program. So if you are interested, please get in touch. In terms of what's actually available, it's 2 consulting services. So if you are a SME with your own site, you can receive 3 visits from a Carbon Trust expert to help you identify the low to no cost energy saving opportunities and improve your energy management processes. If you don't have your own site and you're a startup, you can have a phone call with us and discuss how you can operate your business more efficiently and also design your products and services with the resource efficiency and carbon in mind. So in order to qualify for Start to Act, you need to be a young SME, so you should have started trading no earlier than 2010. Great, so that is it from us. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar on developing your green credentials. If you have any other questions, please contact greenbusiness@carbontrust.com or call us on 02078324773. And the Carbon Trust and myself and Lucy, thank you very much for joining today and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.